Long ago, it was the early 2010s. Back then, Call of Duty was actually good instead of being filled with rats like it is now. The music video for Gangnam Style would drop, which would begin its road to getting 5 billion views on YouTube, and Angry Birds would release, which would start a butterfly effect to this video being created on the Angry Birds TikTok.
Oh, mommy. Smash. Oh, too much hair. Pass. That's a kid.
But most importantly of all, WAPO started its development. WAPO is a 2D open world shooter puzzle game, which, let's be honest, is the most generic description you could possibly give for a game. Now, when development first started on WAPO, the developer liked to share his work with the community a lot, uploading progress on the game to his YouTube channel and doing a boss competition, where his fans could create boss ideas and the top 3 would make it into the game. The entries for this boss competition are a goldmine for early 2010s nostalgia, as all these kids try their best to hobble something together to win the competition, and considering this was 10 years ago, it's crazy to think that all these 8-year-olds making these videos are now 18 and adults. These boss competition entries, whilst not the best, you can clearly tell that there's passion behind them, as they all have their own individual charm, and that's what WAPO's all about. Even though WAPO's just some random game from the depths of Steam, its charm, its vibe, its atmosphere allow me to confidently say that it's one of the most underrated games of all time. So let's actually start talking about the game. The game opens in a hotel where we see our character, who's quite fat and lazy, request some ice cream from the hotel manager over the phone. But the hotel manager, whose name is Carlos, tells us to stop being lazy and get up and go downstairs and get the ice cream ourselves, thus beginning our journey as we get up and slowly walk to the elevator. A part of the charm for the game is going the extra mile for world building, as waiting in line in order to collect our ice cream and waiting in the elevator seem like really unnecessary time wasters at first. The elevator could have easily just been a loading screen, and the line we need to wait in to collect our ice cream didn't even need to exist, yet the developer added them anyway in order to have more world building and immersion. And whilst it may not be a lot, it's quirks like this that make the game's world feel a lot more alive. Anyways, after collecting our ice cream, Carlos tells us explicitly not to spill it anywhere like we apparently have done before, or else he'll kick us out the hotel, and that's exactly what we do. So when we make it back to our room, he confronts us and chucks us out the window down to the jungle below, as we're given the mission to try and figure out a way out of the jungle. The jungle is a pretty average first area, with it being easy, linear, and most importantly isolating as to not overstimulate the player with information, as it's all to just immerse the player into the controls and the world. Speaking of the world, we meet up with this old man who yaps to us about the combat system of the game and the lore, as he reveals that this jungle that we're in is actually the garden to the hotel. However, the hotel and the garden were sealed off from each other after something happened. We also learn about the 4 main races that inhabit the world here, that being the Woms, the main race that control the world and that who we play as, the Fanakas, the bad race that started a war years ago and got themselves chucked down a sinkhole, the Blusses, who you can find in the more quieter corners of the map because they prefer to live in solitude, but they did used to live together in the jungle before, but split apart and left the jungle after some of the other races in the jungle started being a bit annoying towards them. And the last race are the Splunk Hackers, who like to make theme parks. Yep, that's their gimmick, that's all they do, they make theme park rides. Now, this lore dump is actually more important than it seems, as it's the key to solving the first puzzle for the game, as after wandering around the jungle for a bit we can find this tribe that lives within it, who seem to be worshipping this stone god fella, and they seem to be trying to wake it up through some kind of ritual. And now, to complete this ritual, we'll need to get 4 key items, and each item is associated with a different race, so if you were paying attention to the old man's yapping, you'd know what species likes what item and know how to complete the ritual. There's not much else around the jungle. There's this giant fish which acts as a tutorial for the boss fights of the game, this Wum who seems extremely paranoid about the Fnackers, the second species, invading the Wums. Considering the sinkhole that all the Fnackers were chucked down after the war is literally right there, we can go visit it, it's quite ominous. And lastly, there's this parrot who's following us around. He's not really relevant, he's just kind of there and chimes in every so often. Anyways, after completing the ritual and awakening the stone god, we do battle with him, and after defeating him, this tunnel opens up. The tunnel is easily the smallest and shortest area in the game, as all we do in it is just navigate the tunnel, avoiding these ghost things in the process, and do another boss battle with this giant crab rock thing, who spends most of the fight just running around on the walls, and after defeating him we resurface back at the Wum house where we started. Whilst the tunnel area seems relatively pointless, it has a lot of hidden meaning that adds on to the game, like the subtle difficulty spike, the depriving of the player's stimulation making the return to civilization feel a lot better, and a lore explanation for how the Blussers got out of the jungle after they left it. Back at the surface, Carlos, the hotel manager, tells us to go away and find somewhere else to call a home, thus giving us the objective of the game to find a home, which is pretty vague, leaving the player to explore and figure out what they're supposed to do and find their own interpretation of what the objective find a home means. It's a lot like survival games where you create your own objective, go where you want to go, craft what you want to craft, destroy what you want to destroy. There's no looming threat or big objective you need to complete, the game will just let you do what you want and then the story will come naturally. Whilst there are some people who'd rather just have a simple A to B system and be told where to go, others can find a main story distracting and make side content feel like a chore. All this goes together to create a pretty alive and immersive world which can then hint at where you're intended to go for the story, and in the case of the Wapo hotel area, that would be the train station to the city which you need to find a ticket for. Now this city is underground, and in the hotel we get some lore on why the Wums wanted to build a giant underground city, and that's because they wanted to advance in technology but there wasn't really any space to do so. Because of the giant ocean, the sinkhole, the jungle, the Splintcackers festival, the only place they could build a city was underground. And the reason the tickets are so expensive for the train to get down there is because they want a big divide between the overworld and the new underground world. So either out of the player's curiosity or the objective to find a home, this city is where the player will strive to go. There's also references to how the construction of this city is negatively impacting the hotel, as now everyone's moving out of it to go to the underground, leaving the only people left in the hotel not the most, well, normal people. Now this amount of environmental storytelling is insane for a random game on Steam, unless a game would have just placed a city to the left and barred it with a giant ball, but here the game actually thinks about the biology of the world and instead places it underground, which not only makes more lore sense, but it also makes it easier for backtracking. Like I said, the amount of detail that went into this game's world makes it feel like some kind of survival game, to the point where the closest game I could compare Wapo to would be Subnautica of all things. Both Wapo and Subnautica, and by extension any other survival game, all share this brilliant ambience, with worlds that feel alive that you slowly get more and more familiar with, to the point where they feel like your home. And anyone who's played these kind of games knows there's nothing better than discovering a new area in somewhere you're already familiar with, going back and forth between the same place so many times, finding there's another part to it can either be exciting or scary. And the journey to get to the city is the equivalent of going to the abandoned ship in Subnautica. Since the train station borders 3 different zones, the city, the hotel of course, and the Splintcacker theme park, a bunch of NPCs will travel through the train station to get to each area, which kind of makes the train station feel like some kind of hub. And so it doesn't matter which zone you're in, except for the last one, no matter how much you backtrack or run around, you'll mostly end up back at the train station, so it's kind of like a place of comfort and familiarity, like it's your base in Subnautica or something. Moving on to the theme park area, I rarely visit this place as it's mostly just a bunch of theme park rides, which if you want to ride, not only do you have to wait in a really long line, but you also have to convert your money into the Splunkhacker currency, because yes, WAPO has economic inflation. In the basement for the theme park, there's a fortune teller who foreshadows the later events of the game, who mostly just wants to make a bunch of friends, but he also has this weird dark room you can stand in, which he says is magical, when in reality if you stand in there, nothing happens. That was a joke. If you stand in there long enough, you start tripping out and a secret boss fight occurs. If you keep heading left past the theme park, you arrive at the ocean, and if you swim through the ocean, you'll make your way to the Blusser Islands, where, as you can guess by the name, some blussers are. As I said, blussers are only found in the most isolating parts of the map, like the tunnel, the hotel rooftop to over here, and there isn't really much to analyse in these more quiet areas. It's just nice and peaceful, a vibe, just one small piece of the game that adds to the charm of WAPO. Anyways, moving back to the hotel and our goal to try and find a train ticket, in the kitchen of the hotel we find this giant ice cream monster, which is most likely what was blocking the door from us to get back into the hotel when we first fell into the jungle, and is one of the bosses that was in the boss competition and one of the winners of it. It's a pretty normal fight where most of his attacks will do a minor amount of damage, the gimmick being that if one of his minor attacks hits you, you'll be covered in ice cream, and at certain intervals, if you're covered in ice cream, he'll try and eat you, which does the bigger chunks of damage. Defeating the ice cream monster will net you a good amount of money, as well as shortcut access back to the jungle, as well as the tube system, which helps you get around the hotel easier, which is really appreciated because it helps make the world a lot more connected and decreases the amount of backtracking you'll have to do. There's two ways to interpret the hotel, the first being that it's pretty chill and nice, there's no looming threat or clear objective we have to do, we can just freely explore and look around the community, and the second is a bit more negative, how sad and slightly barren the place is, with only oddables inhabiting it now that everyone's gone to the big city. And how broken down the place is becoming, with the elevator not even working properly due to the dust in the attic, and even we're contributing to it by spilling ice cream everywhere and having to go to the city. All this might make you feel a little bad for the hotel manager Carlos, and it makes a lot more sense why he kicked us out in the first place now. So if we help out with the hotel, clear the dust in the attic, and then talk to him, he'll actually give us a train ticket, something that I didn't know for years because I never bothered to talk to him, and instead I got my ticket by stealing it from an elderly couple, the complete opposite. Either way, it doesn't matter, it's behind us and we're on our way to the city. Before we leave this area, I just need to reiterate how iconic it is. In my favourite game series that I'll undoubtedly talk about in the future, the Yakuza series, there's one singular map which appears a lot throughout the games, and you go through it so many times that you start to memorise it like it's the back of your hand, so every change made to it really hits way harder than it should, and that's what this place kind of feels like now, leaving it, as you venture into the unknown after being somewhere familiar for so long. It's hard to imagine there's even more to this game after spending so long in the same area. Needless to say, this area is a huge step up from the jungle, and it's time to see where we'll go in the city. Upon finishing our train journey and getting through passport security, we aren't exactly at the city yet, but rather the Old Town, a mini city on the outskirts of the city central, which is a lot more grim and less regulated. It's kind of like a beta for the main city. You can tell this place was built as practice for the main city, as that's where all the technological advancements are at, leaving this Old Town place to just be a glimpse of the past. If the jungle area was acting as a tutorial for the hotel area, then this area is acting as a tutorial for the main city, as it teaches us about the different level design and the increased importance of money in the city. In the Old Town there are quite a lot of small businesses that can't really take off in the main part of the city, so instead remain here, like this guy who tries to sell a coffee hat which will passively regen your health over time, which is surprisingly important. You see, in the city there there are these things called nefts, creatures that are basically born from trash, and whilst the damage they cause is minor, in large groups it's easy to die from them, making it an obvious metaphor for the waste around the city and climate change. And the coffee hat this guy gives you is an easy way to deal with the minor stings the nefts give you. In the middle of the old town is a giant sinkhole, which adding on to the nefts goes to show how this city isn't as much as it's cracked up to be, and it might be not that much better than the hotel. Anyways, at the bottom of this sinkhole is Betty's Gum Gum shop, which as you can tell sells upgrades for your weapons, and the reason it's in the old town and not the main city is that it's kind of illegal, and it being here draws less attention to it. Now, since there's a giant ramp up in difficulty from here on out, you're going to be backtracking a lot to get better weapon upgrades from here, as well as better healing items from further back at the hotel. And you'd think this would be annoying because you'd have to be going back and forth, but because there's such a distance between shops, it forces you to be careful and considerate about each trip you make. To give the opposite example, in the game Elden Ring, one of its biggest problems is that in the end game, you're gonna be mindlessly running back and forth between shops in order to upgrade your materials, which can be a bit boring, but because in WAPO there's such a distance between shops, the game forces you to not be mindless and actually think about what you're doing, so instead you'll end up doing one big impactful trip instead of lots of little ones that don't really feel like they're doing anything. Moving on to the city central, it's hard to know where to start since the game just drops you in the middle of the place and tells you to go explore, and unlike every other area which is relatively flat and linear, this place is omnidirectional with tubes that lead to the different sections of the city. The first tube leads to this building, which at the bottom of which contains a shop which is easily the best one in the entire game. Whilst its items are pretty expensive, it has a range of everything you need from healing items to some items that you need in order to progress the story, and just above the shop is a hotel, which completes our objective of having to find a new home. However, now we have a new objective, and that's to raise the city's credit. Every time we buy something in this city or complete a job, the city's credit goes up, and once it hits 1 million, apparently a giant expansion will happen to the city, which everyone really wants. Moving on to the underground area of the city, it's my personal favourite since it's quite atmospheric given it's where all the grit of the city goes. Unlike the old town where small businesses could at least thrive a little, here businesses and the people within them are left to rot and die. Down here there's an aquarium which has its owner lounging around inside. Talking to him reveals that those neft things from earlier actually used to live here, but after the waters got polluted they escaped and are now being a nuisance around the city, which gives us a new objective to deal with the nefts, as he says that if they're left untamed it could get quite serious and they could cause the downfall of the city. Elsewhere in the underground city is the Popo Bridge. Now this bridge was originally what was supposed to connect the city central and the old town. However, it was way too long and boring, so instead a train was placed above it, which the player will probably use instead to go from either side. However, if you want, you can still walk across it. I bring it up because this bridge has a weird energy to it. Unlike every other room in the game which has some kind of purpose or point to it, this place is completely pointless, and not only that, but it's also the widest area in the entire game. It's so wide in fact that it's wider than the entire surface world, not including the ocean and the sinkhole. The sewer, which is just below the bridge, also adds to the atmosphere, as the sewer is the home place of the nefts, and the nefts are the first threat in the game that are actively threatening us. Every other boss we've encountered, it's because we've come to them because we want something, but now it's the other way around, which just makes them a juxtaposition. And this entire area is just one big contradiction, and that's why it strikes me so much. Elsewhere in the Undercity is a broken down little fishing village. Now it can be assumed that this place is a lot like the old town, except unlike the old town which has a community to preserve it, this place is not only abandoned and has an entire city built on top of it, but also its waters have been used as a sewer system and are pretty polluted, making the place more pointless than that bridge. There's an old fisherman here who will teach you how to fish, as well as a criminal who wants you to help help break his friend out of prison. Doing so will give you access to his secret shop, which can actually be used to manipulate and exploit the economy of the game in order to skyrocket the credit system, which is often used in WAPO speedruns. At the very edge of the Undercity is a factory where citizens can work to increase the credit score of the city. Now this place is apparently what causes most of the pollution that caused the Nefts to break out of the aquarium and be a problem, and we can plead to the manager to stop causing the pollution, but he says that he doesn't really control the place and that all the citizens are here on their own accord because they really want to get that city expansion. Back up in the main area of the city, there's a lot of jobs we can do to legitimately raise the credits of the city, like delivering newspaper, helping a radio station, and clearing Nefts from someone's attic. Now that last one, whilst pretty fun on normal difficulties, on insane difficulty might be the hardest fight in the game, only tied with the final boss. After reaching the 100,000 credits needed for an expansion, that aquarium owner from earlier does a protest, saying that the expansion cannot continue until the Nefts are dealt with, instructing us to go into the sewers and take down Bereavus, who's essentially the leader of the Nefts. Bereavus is the game's obligatory underwater boss battle because every platformer needs one, and after defeating him a drill starts up, which will apparently drill a cave in the wall because remember this is underground, which is where the new expansion to the city will be built. Only one problem, the driller drills into an opening outside. This shouldn't be happening considering the city is deep underground, however if the player does the math, they'll realise that this city is directly under the forest, so if you go to the right, that's the same place that the sinkhole where the Fnackers were chucked down went. So basically we're now standing on Fnacker territory, who if you don't remember are the bad race. This of course scares all the other ones off, leaving us to explore the Fnacker zone in a disguise on our own. Now when creating a piece of media, it's hard to think where to go after it peaks. After the best film in your franchise drops, the best part of your game is played, what to do next is often a very difficult choice. Most people will try and make the next part better than the last, but more often than not that doesn't work and it ends up flopping. Well, the thing I've seen the most success in is doing the complete opposite of what made it successful and exploring another perspective. Take Star Wars for example. In the original Star Wars trilogy, the good guys were the small group rising up against the big evil bad guys, but in the prequel trilogy, the good guys are the bigger organisation trying to defeat the bad guys who are the smaller one worming their way up. And in the case of WAPO, it should be pretty obvious. The city's big, civilized and futuristic, but the Fnacker sinkhole over here is primal and doesn't really make much sense. It's hard to talk about this area because it goes against everything this game is about. The ambience is dirty, all the NPCs will dogpile you if you're not wearing a disguise, and in the centre of the area, where there's usually a place of importance or comfort, is a giant head, which appears to be the Fnacker's god of sorts, although he seems pretty nice. All this, whilst bad, does add to the charm of the area and helps it feel unique instead of being in the shadow of the city. The only real fundamentally bad part about this area is the temple puzzle, where you have to navigate this claustrophobic space and flip a bunch of levers to proceed, and whilst the ambience here is stellar, with it feeling really ancient and separate from the rest of the game, even more so than the Fnacker sinkhole, their gameplay is really shite, as if you flip one of the levers in the slightly wrong order, it messes you up, forcing you to do 10 minutes of backtracking and fixing it. At the bottom of this sinkhole we meet a ghostly figure called Redev Kened. He gives us a lore dump and explains how there have been 3 generations of races in this world. The first one consisted of mostly just him before he died, the second one consisted of these block-like fellas who built a bunch of temples, including the one we're in right now, this temple's purpose being to connect to the ghostly realm which Redev Kened resides in. We can even see apparitions of other older races during the first generation, however they couldn't really think properly so they don't really count. The second generation of races were all eventually wiped out by the bank rent, that giant face from earlier, who demanded to be fed mud, and after he ate too much he puked it all up and killed everybody. Now the bank rent apparently has an IQ of a 4-year-old because when he killed everybody he got sad that no one could feed him mud anymore, so started crying, and his tears are apparently what formed the sinkhole. After this event, something called the Krentorium, which we don't know is a place or some kind of creature, created the 4 races that are in the world today, using the 3 elements that form creatures. And since the Fnackers are feeding the bank rent mud once again, that threatens the world, so we're given our final objective for the game to take down the bank rent. In the final stretch of the game we climb a giant tower which has been used for multiple purposes over the generations, from originally being used as a gateway to alternate dimensions, to being used as a living quarters, to a kitchen, to worship of that stone god thing from way back in the jungle. It's like the developer had multiple ideas for what the final area could be, so smashed them all into one. Upon reaching the kitchen at the top, we used a giant soup at it to lure all the Fnackers away from the bank rent so we can fight him, and after doing a battle with him he runs away, so returning to Red of Kenned, he gives us this special item. This strange helmet, which if we die inside will transport us to Red of Kenned's secret dimension, which gives us the ability to fast travel to any area in the game, which includes the hideaway hole that bank renters ran to, giving us our final boss fight. Now whilst the game has gotten pretty fast paced over the past couple minutes like it's some kind of JRPG, the game's detail and ambience still remains the same. Oh yeah, also that parrot I mentioned once back in the jungle is still with us. Right, I'm gonna be honest, I've never beaten this guy. There's 2 versions of the game, the definitive edition and the original edition. Now on the original edition, this guy is insanely broken and hard, which is why I couldn't beat him, and on the definitive edition, whilst he's a bit more balanced, I always played the definitive edition on insane difficulty, which is Dark Souls Hotline Miami 2 level shit. So unlike every other boss fight in WAPO or video games in general for that matter who have a gimmick to defeating them, this guy just has none. All you gotta do is dodge his attacks, wait out until you have an opening, then slowly whittle down his health. Just like how the Fnacker area goes against everything every other area stood for, this is the same thing with this boss fight and every other boss fight. After defeating him, he gets sent to the Shadow Realm. As the credits roll, we're shown what happened to every character in the game. Some of the more notable ones are the Woms and the Fnackers finally become friends, and that city expansion finally starts construction. The bank rent is trying his best to restore the ancient buildings he destroyed. The Blossers have sailed off in the ocean on boats never to return and fade into legends. The Splenk hackers continue to want to make theme park rides in the ocean, and Carlos, the hotel manager, retires peacefully, as our main character finds a home in Red of Kenned's alternate dimension. WAPO proves that you don't need to be a super serious or deep game to have good level and world design, and that something as simple as this can still be a masterpiece and sit next to my favourite games that are known for their 10 layers of depth and complexity. There was a planned WAPO online PvP game which looks awesome, but its release has been suspended until the developer can find funding or publishing, so please go subscribe to their channel, support it, wishlist it on Steam, it's good. There's also a game called Tiny Terry's Turbo Trip, which is a pretty small game they're working on in the meantime, so just like the last one, go wishlist that, check it out, it's pretty cool, they have a demo out right now, and yeah. And if you want more videos like this one, don't forget to subscribe and check out my channel too. You didn't have to cut me.